I never expected to find a place like this, at least not in this part of the city. The ad made it sound too good to be true. A one-bedroom apartment, central location, newly renovated interior, and rent nearly half the price of anything else nearby. I assumed there was a catch, some kind of scam or a noisy neighbor from hell, but when I walked in for the viewing, I was genuinely impressed. The landlord, a thin, polite man with a weak handshake, said the place had been empty for a while. Old building, he told me, but solid bones. Everything's updated. Electricity, plumbing, flooring new. I didn't ask why it had been vacant for so long. I should have. The apartment itself felt surprisingly fresh. Smooth white walls, a clean hardwood floor that still had that faint scent of lacquer, modern fixtures in the kitchen. You could tell the renovation had been done recently, but not lazily. Someone had taken their time. The ceilings were tall, and there was an old, ornate molding running along the edge of each room, just enough to remind me this place had history. I moved in a week later with only 3 boxes, a mattress, and my laptop. It was quiet, almost too quiet, the kind of quiet where you become aware of your own breathing. But I told myself it was the contrast. I'd lived downtown before, where sirens and shouting were constant. This was just peace. The first night, I slept surprisingly well. No creaks, no heating pipes rattling like bones. Just silence and darkness, and the faint sound of the city murmuring beyond the closed windows. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something about the layout felt off. The hallway from the front door to the living room, maybe it was the length? It looked longer than it should have been. Or maybe the proportions were strange. I couldn't put my finger on it. Over the next few days, I tried to settle in, unpacking books, putting up shelves, making the place mine. But the feeling never fully left. That something about the space wasn't quite right. I started measuring rooms with my feet. 11 paces across the bedroom, 9 down the hall. Then I checked the layout in the building's listing. There it was again. The hallway appeared shorter on paper than it did in reality. I even joked to myself, maybe there's a secret room or something, some leftover storage closet walled off decades ago. But as soon as I said it out loud, just as a joke, just to fill the air, something inside me clenched. I didn't like how my own voice sounded in that moment. It echoed too sharply off the bare walls, like the apartment was listening. It was around that time I noticed the draft. Faint, cool air brushing along my ankles as I walked through the corridor. I checked the windows, sealed tight. The vents clean, silent. The building wasn't air-conditioned, and it certainly wasn't cold outside. But that little chill, just low to the ground, persisted. And always in the same place, near the hallway wall. I pressed my hand to the drywall. It felt normal, maybe a little cooler than the others, but nothing alarming. Still, I found myself returning to that spot more and more. Just standing there, hand on the wall, like I was expecting it to give way. It never did. That night, I lay in bed, eyes open, listening to the stillness. No traffic, no footsteps, not even the hum of pipes, just quiet. But something about it felt wrong. Like the silence wasn't empty, but full of waiting, watching. As I closed my eyes and tried to sleep, one thought lodged itself in my mind and refused to leave. What if this apartment isn't as empty as it seems? I don't know what finally made me do it. Maybe it was boredom. Maybe it was the draft I kept feeling every time I walked past that spot. Or maybe it was the growing sense that I was being watched. Not constantly, but just enough to make me stop mid-step sometimes and glance over my shoulder. The hallway in my apartment didn't make sense. The floor plan said it was about 10 feet long, but my measurements were always off. The hall stretched longer than it should have. Every time I tried to ignore it, it gnawed at me a little more. So one evening, just before sunset, I gave in. I started with the obvious. I took my phone, turned on the flashlight, and inspected the wall. Nothing stood out. No cracks, no seams. Just drywall and beige paint. I pressed my knuckles against it. Solid. But then, halfway down, I knocked lightly, and froze. The sound was different. Hollow. I knocked again, this time more slowly. One end of the wall gave a dull, thick thunk. But then 2 feet to the right, it echoed, like tapping a box. I stood there for a while, hand resting on the wall, heart beginning to thump just a little faster. Could there be a closet back there? A sealed-off utility space? I crouched down and noticed a ventilation grate near the floor. Oddly placed. It looked newer than everything else around it. Newer than the paint, the molding, even the screws. Curious, I grabbed a screwdriver and pried it loose. Dust puffed out, making me cough. Behind the grate wasn't a vent. It was a narrow cavity, barely wide enough for my arm. And behind it, something smooth and hard. Plaster? Wood? The flashlight didn't help much through the small opening. I pulled out my phone and stuck it into the cavity, flipping the camera to video mode. I recorded a few seconds, then withdrew it and pressed play. What I saw made my scalp tighten. The camera showed a wall, not more drywall, but a second wall just behind the first. Slightly curved, painted in a dull, off-white color, and cracked with age. There shouldn't be a second wall, but there it was. My pulse quickened. I ran my hand along the area, pressing gently. Nothing gave. I tried tapping different spots. Same hollow sound. After a minute, I stood up and went to the kitchen to grab a hammer. It felt ridiculous, like I was on some kind of HGTV ghost hunting special. But I couldn't stop. Not now. The first few hits were gentle, just testing. Then I struck harder. The wall splintered more easily than I expected. Behind the outer sheetrock was nothing, just air. I kept digging. Soon I had opened a hole about 2 feet wide. I pulled chunks of wall away, sending dust swirling into the air. And then, in the dim glow of my flashlight, I saw it. A room. It was narrow, maybe 5 or 6 feet across, and deeper than I could see from the hole. Dust floated lazily through the beam of light. The floor looked like aged tile, patterned faintly in green and brown. An old wooden chair lay on its side in the corner. And beside it, propped against the far wall, was a full-length mirror, cracked across the center like a spiderweb. The air smelled dry, stale, with something else buried in it, like old wood and forgotten things. I felt cold. Not the I left a window open kind of cold, but something sharper. A stillness that didn't match the rest of the apartment. I leaned into the opening, half expecting the floor to creak or something to move. But there was only silence. That kind of silence that isn't empty, just waiting. I could step inside, crawl through maybe, but something stopped me. Some small instinct in the back of my mind that said, "You've seen enough for tonight." So I backed away, slowly, carefully. My flashlight flickered once, just a little, before returning to normal. I turned away from the hole, breathing steadily, trying to ground myself. I patch it tomorrow. Maybe board it up. Call the landlord. But just as I took one step down the hall, I heard it. Faint, soft, a breath, coming from inside the wall. And it wasn't mine. There's something unnatural about silence when it stops you mid-step. Not the kind you get in the countryside or on a sleepy Sunday afternoon. This was weighted. Like sound was being swallowed just outside my perception. Just past that one wall in the hallway. I'd been walking down the corridor again, third or fourth time that day, replaying the same thought. This hallway is too long. It shouldn't have mattered. But it did. Ever since I moved in, little things had started to feel off. Like I was occupying a space that didn't entirely want to be lived in. I kept brushing it off, telling myself it was just the age of the building. But this hallway, it was longer than what was listed on the blueprint I'd found online. By a few feet. Enough to notice. Curiosity turned to fixation. One evening, I pulled out my phone and recorded myself pacing the length, then measured it against the diagram. Sure enough, almost a full meter unaccounted for. I walked the hall again, slowly this time, running my hand along the right wall. Nothing unusual. Smooth drywall, slightly textured. But halfway down, near the baseboard, something caught my attention, a thin seam. Barely visible, but there. Straight and vertical. I crouched and tapped. Thump. Then to the left. Thud. Solid. Back to the seam. Hollow. I sat there, staring at the wall. The air felt cooler in that spot. Not cold exactly, but still stale, like air from a sealed box. I pressed my ear to it. Nothing. Just muffled nothing. I stood, retrieved a small utility knife from the kitchen, and returned. Hands trembling just enough to notice, I started slicing along the seam. The drywall gave in more easily than I expected. Behind it was plywood. Old, faded, covered in dust. What kind of renovation leaves a wall within a wall? I pulled at the edges. The panel shifted slightly, creaked, and then popped out. Behind it was a narrow frame and outline. And within that outline, a door. It wasn't a modern one. This was older, solid wood, faded green paint peeling at the corners. No handle. No hinges visible. Just a flat surface embedded in the framework. It looked like someone had gone out of their way to erase it from the apartment. My chest tightened. There was something deeply wrong about a door being hidden like this. It wasn't just forgotten. It had been intentionally sealed. I hesitated for a long time. Then I knocked. The sound echoed differently this time. Not just hollow, but deep. A space. An actual room behind the door. It was silent. Then I noticed something at the base of the door, a draft. Faint, almost unnoticeable, like the breath of someone exhaling slowly under the crack. I stood, unsure what to do next. Every instinct screamed for caution. But curiosity has a way of smothering reason. I pressed my hand flat against the wood. Cold. Like something stored in a basement. And beneath the tips of my fingers, a vibration. Barely there. A hum, maybe. Or the beating of something buried deep in the walls. Suddenly, the light in the hallway flickered. Once. Twice. I turned to look, nothing behind me. But the air felt heavier. It was like standing in a room moments before a thunderstorm. I stepped back, heart racing, breath shallow. I didn't open the door that night. I didn't sleep either. But when I got up the next morning, the plywood panel I'd removed had somehow been placed back over the door. Not cleanly crooked like it had been done in a hurry. But I hadn't touched it. And there, etched lightly into the wood with something sharp, was a single word. Stop. The message on the wood didn't scare me right away. I told myself it was a joke. Maybe I'd written it myself in some half-asleep state, trying to psych myself out. I didn't even have a knife that sharp. And yet, the grooves in the wood were clean, deliberate. I ran my fingers over them. Still fresh. But the real reason I didn't leave was because I had to know what was behind that door. I had to. I waited until nightfall. I'm not sure why. Maybe some twisted part of me thought it would feel more cinematic, or maybe I wanted to face it when everything else was asleep. When I could listen without the distraction of car horns or neighborhood dogs. I removed the crooked plywood panel again and stared at the door beneath. It hadn't changed, same chipped green paint, same silent draft slipping through the seam at the bottom. I brought my phone, set it to flashlight, and pressed against the edge of the door. To my surprise, it creaked open. No resistance. No lock. It moved like it had been waiting. What I saw inside wasn't what I expected. There were no skeletons. No blood. No dramatic horror movie reveal. Just a room. A small one. Roughly 8 by 8 feet. The air was cold, dense. It smelled like wet plaster, metal, and something faintly sweet, almost rotten, but not quite. The kind of smell you don't recognize until you associate it with fear. The flashlight beam swept across the floor first, cracked linoleum tiles, discolored with age. A dusty chair sat in the corner, its legs uneven, leaning at an awkward angle. Beside it, a collapsed cardboard box, empty except for something dark and crumpled tucked inside. Clothes, maybe? I didn't check. On the far wall stood a full-length mirror. It was the only thing that looked clean, too clean. The glass was cracked in the center, but free of dust. Its wooden frame was pristine, dark oak with curling filigree. I took a step inside. The sound changed. Like I'd stepped out of the apartment and into something older, deeper. My breathing sounded louder in there. Every motion echoed. And my flashlight started to flicker. I hated how my reflection looked in that mirror. Not because it was distorted, but because it wasn't. It was perfect. Too perfect. No flicker from the phone light. No delay. My face stared back at me with uncanny clarity, same eyes, same posture. But something behind them felt off. I waved my hand. My reflection waved too. But I had the distinct sensation that it wasn't copying me. It was just doing what I was doing, like we were both acting out a script we didn't write. I turned away. A faint noise stopped me cold. A single breath. Drawn in slowly. Then released. It wasn't mine. I spun around, but the room was empty. I shone my light into the corners. Under the chair. Behind the mirror. Nothing. Except, in the silence, the breathing continued. Faint, but steady. As if the room itself was alive. Or like something was hiding in the walls, just beneath the surface, mimicking the rhythm of my lungs. I backed out slowly, flashlight trembling in my hand. And just as I reached the threshold, something clicked behind me. I turned. The mirror had fogged. Just a little. A soft bloom of condensation like a sigh on cold glass. And within it, in that blurry patch, was the faint outline of another face. Not mine. No expression. Just watching. I slammed the door shut and resealed the wall with anything I could find, old nails, boards, furniture pushed against it. I even hung a blanket to cover the gap. It looked ridiculous, but I couldn't bear to see that seam anymore. I told myself I'd leave it alone. Move on. Forget it. But every night since at 3:13 a.m. without fail, I wake up, and I swear from the other side of that wall, I hear it. Breathing. And sometimes it sounds closer. I used to like the quiet. I craved it, in fact, after years of living in the chaos of shared walls and paper-thin ceilings. Silence meant peace, control, space to breathe. But not anymore. Now silence feels like a warning. It started small in ways that were easy to ignore. The cold draft down the hallway grew stronger enough to make the edge of my door rattle some nights. I shoved towels beneath it. Useless. The chill would still reach me brushing across my face while I tried to sleep, threading icy fingers through my sheets. Like something moving through the apartment, unseen. I started keeping the bedroom light on. Not because I was scared, I told myself. Just because I was tired of stumbling in the dark. But truthfully, it was because of the dreams. They weren't like normal nightmares. There was no chase, no fall, no screaming. Just presence. Heavy, oppressive. In every dream, I was back in the hallway. But it was longer than before, endless, and the door at the end wasn't hidden anymore. It was wide open. Pitch black inside. Something breathing just beyond the threshold. And always, just before I woke up, I would see it, a figure in the mirror. Standing behind me. Motionless. Watching. Each time I woke, I felt it like the air had been sucked from the room. Like I hadn't truly left the dream. The worst part was the camera. I set it up one night. A motion-triggered app on my phone. Just to prove to myself there was nothing to fear. I aimed it down the hallway directly at the sealed wall. Left the light on low. Crawled into bed and waited. The next morning, I had 3 new recordings. The first was nothing, me walking past, going to the bathroom. The second was at 3:13 a.m. On the dot. The frame was still, the hallway dim. But after 10 seconds, there was movement. A flicker at the far end. Like a shadow passing across the wall. But there was no source. Nothing that should have made it. The shadow moved toward the camera, then disappeared before reaching the frame. The third video was worse. It was short. Only 7 seconds. The camera glitched, fuzzed slightly, and for a split moment, the app picked up a figure. Not a person. Just a shape. Like someone standing with their back to the wall. Tall. Still. Wrong. Then it cut out. I didn't sleep at all that night. I tried to be rational. I told myself the app had misfired. Shadows. Glitches. Compression artifacts. That's all. But the following night, something changed. I woke to sound. Not breathing. Not whispering. Tapping. Faint. Rhythmic. Like fingernails on drywall. Tap. 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 I held my breath, listening. Tap. Tap. Silence. Then, a voice. Barely above a whisper. Coming from the hallway. Let me in. I froze. I wanted to shout to ask who was there, but I couldn't. My voice caught in my throat. I reached for my phone. The screen wouldn't turn on. Dead. No power. The tapping resumed. Slower now. Almost playful. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. I just lay there, staring at the bedroom door, waiting for the knob to turn. But it never did. Eventually, the sound stopped. The air settled. The silence returned heavy and absolute. I stayed in bed until sunrise. When I finally emerged, phone back online, I checked the hallway. Everything looked normal. The furniture I'd used to block the wall hadn't moved. But I noticed something new. A scratch mark just beside the seam. 3 lines. Vertical. Thin. Claw-like. And next to them, written in the dust, the same word that had been etched into the panel before. Stop. This time, I didn't laugh it off. Because it wasn't just a warning anymore. It felt like a countdown. By the 6th night, I was no longer trying to understand what was happening. I just wanted it to stop. I didn't sleep. I barely ate. I stayed out as long as I could, lingering in coffee shops, wandering aimlessly through the city until well after midnight. But I always had to come back. I told myself I could sleep with headphones in, lights on, door locked. I told myself the thing, whatever it was, wasn't real. It was stress. Imagination. Something broken inside me. But when I opened my apartment door that night, I knew something had changed. The air was different. Heavier. Stale, like a room that had been sealed for decades. It clung to my skin, my clothes, even the back of my throat. I could taste it. I stepped inside cautiously, phone in hand, flashlight ready. The hallway light was off. I didn't turn it on. I just stared at the far end, at the place where the false wall had been, where I'd found the door. I'd sealed it twice now. First with furniture. Then with nails and boards. I even had a friend help me drill into the studs. It shouldn't have been accessible anymore. But the furniture was gone. Moved carefully, silently. Not tipped or tossed, just rearranged. Like someone had thoughtfully set it aside. The blanket I had pinned to cover the seam was crumpled on the floor. The wall, what was left of it, was open. Not broken. Not smashed. Open. Like it had let itself out. I wanted to leave. I told myself to leave. But my feet wouldn't listen. I walked down the hallway one slow step at a time. Each one felt heavier, like something was pulling me forward, or like gravity itself had thickened. I reached the opening. The hidden room was different now. No dust. No decay. The chair was upright. The floor had been swept. The air no longer smelled like mold or plaster, it smelled sterile, almost surgical. And in the center of the room, standing in front of the mirror, was a figure. Not a shadow this time. Not a reflection. Not a trick of the light. A person. Or something close. It looked like me. Same height. Same build. Same clothes. But it wasn't me. Its movements were slightly wrong, stiff, lagged, like watching someone puppet a human body. It didn't turn when I stepped in. It didn't flinch when I gasped. It just stood there, staring into the mirror. Then it raised its hand. So did my reflection. But I hadn't moved. My body felt hollow. My limbs refused to respond. Couldn't scream. Couldn't blink. All I could do was watch. The figure turned its head. Slowly. Just enough to meet my eyes through the cracked mirror. Not directly. Through the reflection. His face was smiling. Mine wasn't. I backed away. Finally able to move. Heart pounding in my ears. But the hallway behind me had changed. The apartment longer than before. The walls seemed to stretch, closing in on themselves. Doors vanished. Light dimmed. I ran. I don't remember unlocking the front door. I don't remember taking the stairs. I only remember the cold air hitting my face when I finally made it outside. My chest burned. My hands shook. I didn't stop running until I was several blocks away. I haven't gone back. I never will. I called the landlord the next day, told him I was breaking the lease. He didn't argue, just sighed, said, "You're not the first one." That was all he said before hanging up. It's been weeks. I'm staying with a friend for now. They think I'm paranoid. I don't care. I sleep with the lights on, mirrors covered, doors locked. But sometimes, late at night, I catch my reflection in the window. And for a second, I swear it blinks after I do.